Begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So I apologize to everybody. We're doing this meeting a little bit differently. Commissioner Harper Peterson is on Skype, and so I am going to read something into the record. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that at least a portion of the Planning Commission meeting is conducted pursuant to California Government Code Section 54953, in that Planning Commissioner Angela Harper Pedersen is in the state of Alaska, located at 401 Northeast Northern Lights Boulevard, Suite 101, Anchorage, Alaska 95501. Planning Commissioner Harper Pedersen is participating by audio-video teleconference through Skype. In accordance with the Ralph M. Brown Act, this teleconference location has been identified in the notice and agenda for this meeting. Ms. Porras, it would now be appropriate for you to conduct roll call, after which I would ask Commissioner Harper Pedersen to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record.
I can do that.
So roll call.
Commissioner Bergman.
Present.
Commissioner Marsters.
Present.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen.
Present.
Commissioner Gutierrez is absent tonight. Chair Silberman.
Present. I would now like to request that Commissioner Harper Pedersen respond to the following questions. Commissioner Harper Pedersen, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Were you able to hear our proceedings on this end up until now?
Yes, I was.
Do you have a copy of the agenda for this meeting?
Yes, I do.
Have you posted the agenda at the location where you are?
Yes, I have.
Is your location reasonably accessible to the public such that any member of the public could participate in this audio-video teleconference from your location if her or she wished to do so?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Are there any members of the public there with you who would like to participate in the public comment portion of this meeting or otherwise address any agenda item for this meeting?
No, there are not.
I would now like to ask that any member of the Planning Commission speak up at this point if such Planning Commission member has not been able to clearly hear Commissioner Harper Pedersen. Hearing no comment, the record should reflect that all Planning Commissioners present have indicated that they were able to hear Commissioner Harper Pedersen clearly. I would next request that any Planning Commissioner present speak up at this time if such Commissioner has any reason to believe, based on voice recognition or otherwise, that the person representing herself to be Commissioner Harper Pedersen is not truly so. Hearing no comment, the record should reflect that no Planning Commissioner present has expressed doubt, even with body language, that Commissioner Harper Pedersen is the party participating by audio-video teleconference with Planning Commissioners present here. I'd like to advise the Planning Commissioners and City staff that any votes taken during the audio-video teleconference portion of this meeting, which is the whole thing, must be taken by roll call. And I want to thank staff for this exciting script that I just was given the honor to read. So with that, I will ask whether there's anyone here who has public comment on a matter that is not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, turning to the minutes. We have two sets of minutes. Let's start with the minutes from the September 15th, 2014 meeting. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Doesn't appear so. I have one. I think it's a little silly, but I can be at times. On page 3, technically the motion passed 3-2, not 3-0. So I'd ask that that any motion to approve the minutes be made, considering that change request.
So noted.
If there are no other changes to the minutes, I would entertain a motion to approve them.
I move to approve the September 15th, 2014 San Carlos Planning Commission minutes with the changes noted.
Is there a second?
Second.
If I could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Bergman?
Is it a present or no? What is it? It's approved?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen?
Yes.
And Chair Silberman?
Yes. Okay, moving on. I also have the October 6th, 2014 minutes. And actually, does anyone have any changes? Because I actually have something that's not insignificant, I think, and I actually need some help with it because I'm not sure if my memory is correct. So if you look at page 4, where it says Commissioner Marsters made a second motion to approve the project, but on the condition that the project remove the paseo and center the project on the site and include landscaping on both sides with staff to approve the landscape changes, and the applicant work with staff to receive input from the neighbors about measures to reduce construction impacts. I actually thought that last part was a little bit more, was a little broader than that. I mean, my recollection from the meeting was that we had included a condition of approval that gave discretion to the staff to actually require certain changes and approve them before construction could occur. And staff was supposed to meet with the applicant and with the neighbors, but I actually thought that there was a condition of approval in that, and it wasn't simply. And I apologize for being colloquial, but it wasn't just touchy-feely, that there was actually some bite to it. And I'm wondering if anyone's memory is different than mine or the same.
Through the chair, I guess I'll start first. My recollection was that the Planning Commission had asked staff to work with the applicant to ensure that the neighbors were notified about construction, when it would start, the timing of construction. So this was one of the items I recall that the First Baptist Church representative working at the daycare facility was asking for. So it was about ways to ensure that the neighbors were notified when construction would occur and for how long it would last.
My recollection was that there was a little bit more discretion on that. They were actually staff was supposed to work to find ways to possibly improve the noise, see if there's a way not necessarily, improve.
To minimize impacts, if that is that in your memory. I mean, basically, that there was a lot of discussion about the impacts. It wasn't just, and I'm not correcting. It wasn't just the church. It was a lot of folks were concerned about impacts from the construction, and I don't think it was actually just noise. It was some other impacts as well. And I thought that we had included something a little bit stronger than this.
I thought that we had to be careful about including too much in there because the problem was giving the residents who were there sort of an approval for the particular measures that we were talking about. And so there was a balance between, keeping the residents involved and not making it onerous on staff or the applicant.
Through the chair.
It wasn't residential, with the residents' approval, but the staff's discretion is what I understood.
This, through the chair, this sounds complicated enough that I'd recommend that we continue consideration of that set of minutes so we can look at the tape and accurately reflect what happened during that time.
Fair enough. Unless anybody objects, I'm going to not entertain a motion to approve these minutes and move on to something else. Seeing no objection, the next item on the agenda is a public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, et cetera, on the application, followed with the staff's recommendations. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of the community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion from the floor can be held. The Commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice. The public notice or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. We ask that speakers fill out a speaker's form. If they don't mind, it would make things a lot smoother. They're found by the door, and they can hand them to the recording secretary, who I believe is Ms. Porras. Prior to addressing the Commission, the speaker should come up to the microphone to speak. Since the meeting is being recorded, this will assist staff in preparing the minutes. On the agenda, the next item would be the Transit Village, but unless there's an objection, because I expect it to be significantly shorter, I would ask that we begin with 1673 Laurel Street. If there's no objection, let's go ahead and call that matter first.
No objection.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Jill Lewis, and I will present to you the request for tentative map approval for the mixed-use development at 1673 Laurel Street. The 4,998 square foot site is located on the east side of Laurel Street between Central Avenue to the north and St. Francis Way to the south. Public alley access is found at the rear of the property. The property is owned MUSB, Mixed Use South Boulevard, and has a corresponding general plan land use designation of neighborhood retail, mixed use, medium density. The proposed structure was approved by the Planning Commission on April 7th, 2014, and is a 4-story mixed-use building consisting of 1 commercial space with a tenant to be determined on the 1st story in front of 9 covered parking spaces and 2 apartments each on the next 3 stories. The proposal in front of you this evening is a request to convert the units, 6 residential and 1 commercial, into condominiums, meaning that the units could be sold individually instead of rented. Staff has reviewed the application and determined it to be consistent with all aspects of the subdivision ordinance and the general plan. This is the formal motion should you choose to approve the project. I am available at this time for any questions you have of planning staff. The applicant, who is also the property owner, is here this evening should you have any questions for him.
Does anyone have any questions for staff at this time?
Jill, I had a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of the items was the basis for the finding, is it physically suitable for the proposed density of development? And I know we went over this before. The zoning and general plan designations allow for a density of up to 50 dwellings per acre. The maximum allowable residential density for just under 5,000 square foot site is 6 units. So there's 6 residential units and 1 commercial unit. Do we not take into consideration the commercial aspect as far as when we're looking at the residential piece of it?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the second question I had is the parking spaces. And so how are those 9 parking spaces going to be divvied up? And does anything change now that this is more of a condos for sale versus rentals? And does that affect the commercial? And do they have to provide a parking space now?
Well, the commercial is not required to provide a parking space because it's less than 1,500 square feet. And as to the residential units, the property owner is here, so I would defer to him. Maybe he could offer some additional input.
If you don't mind coming up to the lectern.
You have 1.5 parking for each unit, which is definitely it's first come. We give it one parking to each unit.
But if you're selling the condos, is it a shared parking situation? And how do you deal with, you have 6 units,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So do 3 units get 2 parking spaces? If somebody comes along and says, I want 3, do they get 3 parking spaces?
No.
How
No, just first of all, I don't want to sell. Just I want to keep it as a retirement property. But I believe I have to do it maximum 2 per unit. The first couple units first come.
And then after that, will the parking spaces be sold with the unit?
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so the first 3 units will be 2 parking spaces. Are there different size
No,
bedrooms? So all of them are 2 bedroom
all of them is 2 bedroom.
or 2 bedroom?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Before you, did you have anything else that you wanted to say about the project?
Just hopefully I can start soon.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant or for staff?
For staff or for, when does the BMR kick in? There's 6 units. What's the threshold for that to kick in?
7 units or more for ownership.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Angela, do you have any questions for staff or for the applicant?
I do not. Thank you.
I'm struggling with this. If you have 6 units, there must be some sort of a condo association that becomes part of this.
Yes, there's a condition of approval in the tentative map certificate
Okay.
that the condo association would have to draw up CC&Rs.
And I assume that the owner would retain as many properties as he wants, and then he would be able to sell off, say, 2 or 3 or 4, depending upon what he wants to do. Okay. Still struggling with the parking a little bit.
So if he were to sell 3 units and 2 parking to the first 3 units, then the next 3, they park on the street is basically what happens, right?
So there's 9 parking spaces total.
Okay.
So at minimum, each unit would get one
one.
space.
And any additional cars would end up parking on the street.
That's correct.
And do we take that into consideration? Anywhere within our existing code?
It's inferred that it's taken into consideration because this is the parking requirement for this type of project. So the project meets the parking requirements for the mixed-use district. It's
SB.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any more questions for staff? Okay. I don't have any speaker slips. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to close this public hearing on this particular item.
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bergman,
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters,
Yes.
Commissioner Harper-Pedersen,
Yes.
Chair Silberman.
Yes. All right. So is there any discussion among the commission?
I'm not happy about the parking, but I don't think there's anything we can do about it. So, not beyond that.
Commissioner Harper-Pedersen, do you have any comment?
It is the exact building we approved on April 7th. And it does meet our parking requirements. So I have no additional comments.
Okay. Well, if there's no further comment, I would entertain a motion.
I move that the Planning Commission grant tentative map approval for the mixed-use building at 1673 Laurel Street, APN 051-372-260.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Bergman,
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters,
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Yes.
Chair Silberman.
Yes. Okay. That item being complete, I'm going to open the public hearing on the Transit Village matter. I have 4 speaker slips so far. If you do intend to speak and you don't mind completing a speaker slip, it would be appreciated. I believe we're going to start with a presentation.
We just lost our screens.
I think it's just there's nothing on them, so it's okay.
Power saver.
For those of you who are dealing with new technology.
The powers that be of.
Just 1 minute. I apologize for the delay.
So while we're dealing with technology bugs, I'll just note for the record that in addition to the materials that were originally published for this meeting, the planning commissioners and the public have been provided a number of additional materials that we've reviewed and will be part of the record. And those materials include a November 3rd, 2014 letter from Gladwin D'Souza, chairman of the San Carlos Belmont Group of Sierra Club, a supplemental report from the planning division staff, a letter from Caltrain dated October 30th, 2014 that addresses the environmental impact report and trees, an October 31st, 2014 letter from Mike Bruno discussing parking, a draft tree inventory and canopy assessment, PCEP, that discusses trees, an email from Suzanne Stevens dated October 28, 2014, which is favorable to the proposal, and an email dated October 28, 2014 from Robert Kortzaborn, which is also favorable to the proposal.
Okay, staff is ready. I'll go ahead and take it away.
Take it away.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Harper Pedersen. The design review application for the Transit Village mixed-use project is returning to the Planning Commission tonight for further discussion. This project was last presented to the Planning Commission 4 weeks ago on October the 6th. The applicant, Legacy Partners, is requesting design review approval to construct a 202 apartment unit project in 6 three-story buildings with an accompanying 288 parking spaces, in addition to a new public plaza in front of the San Carlos Caltrain station and 2 new commercial buildings, each 2 stories each, on each side of the Caltrain station. Associated parking with the commercial buildings include 11 on-site parking spaces, with 23 parking spaces reserved to serve the commercial buildings as part of the transit center. On October 6th, the Commission requested that staff respond to and follow up on 4 items. These include a response to the Sierra Club letter authored by Gladwin D'Souza and dated September 29th, which was included in the Commission's packet on October the 6th. This letter expressed concerns regarding the project's overall density, the reduction in the amount of affordable units on site, pedestrian crossings along El Camino Real, assurances for community benefits, provisions for unbundled parking, residential parking permit programs, public transit incentives, electric car charging stations, car share and bike share amenities, on-site bike path connectivity, the number of bicycle parking spaces per unit, and wayfinding signage. All of these issues raised in the Sierra Club letter have been responded to by city staff and are included in Attachment 2 of the staff report. In addition, staff has provided a copy of Attachment 2, the responses directly to Gladwin D'Souza as well as David Crabb of the Sierra Club. The Planning Commission also requested a copy of the final plan development plan that was approved by the City Council in November last year. The PD plan booklet is provided as Attachment 4 to your staff report. Lastly, the Commission asked staff to provide clarifications that assure tree planting along the railroad berm and an update regarding the relocation of the shuttles. Attachment 4, the San Carlos Village Plan Development Plan, or PD plan, that was adopted last November includes, or it now includes, the signed ordinance 1468 that was adopted by the City Council, which includes all of the conditions and mitigation measures from the certified EIR. The PD plan also contains the resolution passed by the City Council for the provision of 20 affordable units on site. The PD plan also has been revised to reflect certain aspects of ordinance number 1468. The first one being the table of contents to reflect a new Part 4 to the PD plan, which includes Ordinance 1468 and Resolution 2013-116. On page 13 of the PD plan, it includes revisions for affordability, particularly for 5% of all units to be available for those with low incomes and 5% of all units available to be available for those with moderate income levels. There are also revisions on page 14 concerning a transportation demand management strategy that offers transit subsidies for the residents. And then on page 91 of the PD plan, Appendix D, it modifies the land use regulations that were required in the ordinance that require a use permit for any amplified outdoor sound and minor use permits for eating and drinking establishments in the commercial buildings, which are buildings number 7 and building number 8. Requirements for the responsibility of tree planting along the berm is addressed in condition B15, which is located on page 11 of Ordinance 1468. In this condition, it requires the developer or legacy to plant, maintain, and irrigate new trees along the berm slope. Specifically, this condition requires that up to 70 evergreen trees be planted on the east side of the berm from the north end of the project all the way down to the first commercial building, or building number 7. An agreement between the city and legacy is required, and it must be executed before a building permit can be issued. The actual timing of the planting of these trees can be found under condition B14, which is on page 10 of Ordinance 1468, and it requires that the trees be planted before permitting the occupancy of each building. With respect to shuttles, the Planning Commission requested an update concerning current operations of the existing transit shuttles located on Old County Road next to Caltrain Station. The Commission's current staff report for tonight describes the results of a shuttle analysis that was previously presented to the City Council, which determined shuttle service delays and removal of parking spaces in the transit center if the shuttles were to be relocated on the west side of the Caltrain station within the transit center portion of the project. The relocation of the shuttles, however, was not made a condition of plan development plan approval. Instead, the city and Samtrans committed to working together to try and resolve the issues surrounding shuttles circulating through some of the east side neighborhoods. As of the writing of this staff report, the city is currently in the process of reviewing a proposed draft shuttle circulation plan and plans to meet with the GESC, or the Greater East San Carlos Neighborhood Association, Samtrans staff, and city staff to review and discuss the contents of that draft plan. This concludes the list of items requested by the Planning Commission on October 6th, but staff has a few more items to note since the last commission meeting 4 weeks ago. First, the proposed resolution that would approve design review of the Transit Village project has been slightly revised. In your packet, this resolution is provided as attachment 1, and you'll see it with strikeout and underline text modifications. The amended resolution addresses several items. First, it includes additional language to condition number 2 regarding the front setbacks to buildings 5, 6, and 7. It also notes that the reduction in residential amenities is consistent with the reduction in the number of overall units, the number of overall units being originally 280, which have now dropped down to 202. It also includes added language regarding the need to evaluate electric car charging stations, the usage. This is additional language added to condition number 10 in the draft resolution. There is a new condition, condition number 11, which states that the landscaping for building number 8 does comply with the PD plan condition of approval B16B. This condition of approval is on page 6 of Ordinance 1468. The previous condition, condition number 11, which was the phasing of improvements to El Camino Real, has been moved to be combined with condition number 19, which is the construction and phasing of off-site improvements in the El Camino Real right-of-way. And then finally, there was additional language added to condition number 41 under building requirements. These are the noted changes in the draft resolution. In addition, since October 6th, staff has received additional correspondence. Correspondence from Suzanne Stevens and R.N. Kortzenborn were received on October 28th and is included in the staff report packet. Since the packet was released, staff has received additional correspondence which has been provided to the Planning Commission tonight, if not emailed before. This includes a letter from David Crabb dated October the 30th, a letter from Marion Lee, who is the Executive Officer for Caltrain Modernization, dated October 30th, a letter from Mike Bruno, dated October 31st, and a letter from Richard Cesarin, which was actually received today. If any of the commissioners do not have copies of this correspondence, please let me know, and I'll make sure to get that to you. Before I conclude, staff we do want to respond in particular to the comment letter received by David Crabb. In your correspondence, you should have received a supplemental staff report, which is a one-page memo-oriented document that was provided to the Planning Commission tonight. In Mr. Crabb's letter, specifically, he points out a mitigation measure NO 3.1, which when the EIR was prepared required the installation of sound attenuating courtyard walls. Mr. Crabb's concern is that the courtyards facing El Camino Real might be required to have a 6-foot high sound wall blocking them off from El Camino Real, and further that this condition, the mitigation measure NO 3.1 should be revised to reflect that no sound wall be required. In response to David Crabb's letter, staff has prepared the supplemental staff report, and in this supplemental staff report, it provides language that would be added to mitigation measure NO 3.1. Specifically, it calls out General Plan Policy NOI 1.5B, which says that new multifamily residential development shall maintain a standard of 65 LDN in community outdoor areas. And it also includes reference to a review by acoustical consultants Illingsworth and Rodkin for compliance with this mitigation measure, and determined that the courtyard areas would have less than 60 LDN and no sound attenuation measures will be necessary for any of the courtyards facing El Camino Real, with 2 exceptions. One is the courtyard area between buildings 2 and 3 and the area at the north end of the project site. So the language in this memo that is underlined would be the language that would be added to this particular mitigation measure to address that issue. I'm providing in this slide here the recommended motion. Should any of the planning commissioners choose to make it, we can bring this up if need be. But otherwise, this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is here tonight, as well as the Community Development Director, Project Planner Colette Meunier, and the City Attorney to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for staff at this time?
I just want to confirm the letter from Mike Bruno and also the Sierra Club. It talks about residential parking permit, but I believe that that is actually one of the conditions, correct? I just want to confirm that. Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Harper Pedersen, do you have any questions for staff at this time?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Is there any presentation from the applicant recognizing that we did get a presentation in the last meeting? Is there a supplemental presentation? No. And obviously, you're available for questions if necessary. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant at this time? Okay. So I just want to verify I have 5 comment cards from the public. I want to get a sense of whether there's anyone who wishes to speak that has not filled out a comment card, because it's gonna affect the amount of time that I allow for the speakers. So is there anyone who would like to speak who has not filled out a comment card? Okay, so I think I'm going to, there's 5 speakers. I think I'm going to give 4 minutes per speaker. Seems like a reasonable amount of time. So I'm going to begin by calling up Rita Fusaro. Hi.
Hi. So my question is primarily about the shuttles and the circulation issue for Transit Village. Just want to remind, I thought the city council was going to be here, but we actually have an open-ended sort of thing going on from the Holly Street ordinance that was put into place, because at that time they promised, actually, on June 23rd, that they would do a evaluation and get the trucks and big rigs and buses and all the major big 18 huge vehicles that currently come down Holly Street, that they would move to remove them. So that hasn't happened yet. So before we adopt anything about the shuttle service and try and put that in place, I was hoping that maybe we could combine that with this overall discussion of how to get those big trucks off of Holly. So that was that. And then just another reminder that just to provide good bicycle paths and routes for these bicyclists. I know that they have designated routes by calbike.org, but they really all like to use Holly Street. So so they're out there and they're sharing the lanes. And so more things that come up on that street, the more problems they'll face as well. That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. David Crabb.
Chair and members of the commission, it's a continuation of what we started a month ago. I'm going to talk about the courtyards. I want to skip a couple of minutes. First, thank the change for the sound wall issue that I brought up. I'm glad that has been straightened out. Second is just a couple of clarifications, questions. Actually, I got a clarification of it. I asked a question last time, was about the roofs being fiberglass shingles rather than tiles. And I wondered if any of you were even aware that they were that versus tile. That style of building just automatically tells me that it's tile, and I was curious what the difference was, or why that decision was made. And if the decision was made because of weight, there are alternatives in metal and so on that look like tile that would look better than shingles on the roof. So that's just a suggestion. The second one was I had suggested some roof decks, which the staff suggested was not a good idea. Pardon me, because the neighbors were concerned about overlooks. So I understand that, but I also mentioned solar panels up there as a possibility, and so I would like to see if that roof could be really used for something besides just a bunch of roofing material. So now the courtyards. My big concern with this new scheme, as I said, I like a lot about it. I like the fact that the courtyards are down on grade now, and you can walk by and you can look in the courtyards. But I don't feel that the building really engages the community. It does. Quite frankly, the way it's designed, it's not even clear where the front door is to those buildings. It's kind of off to the side. I could easily see one walking past it. And as I say, I like Pacific Hacienda. Everyone mostly in the room likes Pacific Hacienda, which brought the main entrance into the courtyard itself so that you actually walk through a garden area into the main entrance, and the main entrance had a presence to it that you really knew that's what it was. I don't see that here. And also there are a couple of these courtyards that don't even have access from inside the building, that one would have to actually leave the building, go out on the public sidewalk to walk back into the courtyard. So the only folks that are actually enjoying that courtyard are the folks that have their apartments around the courtyard. The ones on the outside of the building don't, and people walking by look into it, but they're not really enjoying it. If you walk through it, you'll enjoy it. So I'd like to see if that could be looked at. Staff said that they kind of agreed with my concern about direct access to the courtyards, but they were concerned about losing a bedroom. I feel that this architect is talented enough to, wherever she is, to work this out without losing a bedroom. I've had many projects like this where things have come up and we've had to make a change, and that's one that you can live with, and I'm sure you can make it happen. I've had to do it for mechanical systems all the time. The other concern, let's see if I can. I was thinking of a compromise on the courtyard. The other thing about having the entrance in the courtyard is it solves a secondary problem about the people in the building having access to the direct access to the courtyard. And if you remember a month ago when the other development was here before, it was heard before ours, there was a comment in there where they actually talked about being up on the upper floor. And they actually said, and we have windows here that look out in our courtyard. They understood the concept that it should be part of the building, that people inside the building should be aware the courtyard is there and connect to it, and so on. And I think it should be the case with this building, too. So these are architectural comments. The other comments I had in my letter are quite frankly aesthetic issues, and I'm not going to push them very hard. I'm not too keen about stone kind of here and there on a project rather than having some coherence to it. But it's an aesthetic decision, so I'm not going to argue that. So basically, I'd like to have you look, see if there's a way that they could come up with an alternative for the courtyards where the entrances could be off the courtyards. And if you look at the buildings up and down the peninsula, a lot of the old buildings up and down the peninsula, like the 20s and 30s, that were 3 or 4 story apartment buildings around a courtyard, every single one of them has the entrance through the courtyard into the building. It's a standard kind of approach, and so this one is kind of an oddball. And if you look at the entrance in terms of someone living in those units, you walk in the entrance and there's a stairway on your right and a hallway in front of you. There's no sense of entrance to it, like having a lobby or something that, like you'd expect to have in a big apartment building like this. So anyway, these are aesthetic decisions. I'm not sure if they're planning decisions or not, but I'll throw it out to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't read the last name, but it's Bob Black. Mr. Black?
Thank you.
Please feel free to begin, Mr. Black.
Good evening, Chairman. Bob Black, longtime resident of San Carlos. My first two paragraphs are about our vision statement. People who work in San Carlos can afford to live here. I believe there's a lack of housing for those of low income. We need such housing. The need for this is going to increase markedly in the near future with the completion of the hospital north of Holly and the upscale Landmark Hotel south of Holly, both of which will employ large numbers of low-wage workers. The City of San Carlos has few resources providing such housing, and we should make use of what resources we have to maximize this extent possible. One resources that we do have is the requirement for a developer of an apartment complex to provide 15% of rental units at below market rate. 10%, 15%, that's 5 units. Doesn't seem like much, but it's something. And we should really respect that. If for some reason the Planning Commission decides to require less than 15%, I do request the Planning Commission thoroughly document the rationale for that decision. Thank you. And then I have another comment. I noticed it said in the presentation earlier, up to 70 trees will be maintained for a number of years. Up to is really a dangerous way to specify something, because 3 trees would satisfy that. So it should be not fewer than some number of trees. So I would recommend you make that change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Bonnie McClure.
Bonnie McClure, speaking for Sierra Club, San Carlos Belmont Group. I provided you with a letter from Gladwin D'Souza, who is our chairman. I would like
the mic has gone out. No, it's not working. I have a button that I haven't pressed yet that apparently gets me to turn off the mics, but I would never do that to you. Never. Nope. I mean, I can hear you just fine, frankly, but I assume that we want the record to reflect it. I mean, I think the light, does this do anything? Now you want to try and talk? Try again?
trying again.
I did not press the button.
Do you hear me? Barely, huh? All right, I'll talk louder, okay?
There you go.
All right. We wanted to send appreciation to the planning staff for
I didn't do that either.
Okay. We appreciate the answers to our questions and suggestions. We don't always agree with them, but we would like to have you readdress a couple items. And that is the TDM report. And we feel that the new TDM is very weak, and we would like to see it reviewed again and take a better look at it. But the main thing that I wanted to bring up was in response to the quotations of breakdown on expenses and the advantage of the developer investigating with Caltrain, particularly. They had a pilot plan that will end the end of 2014. And it is not mentioned in this letter because that would be behind the time that we're talking about for development. So the numbers in here are based on what was received from me, from Samtrans and Caltrain as of today. And they were quoting 2015 rates, which were used in his calculations. However, with the pilot plan that Caltrain had for residential developers only charged the whole development project under $14,000. That was the cap. Now, I could not get the information from Caltrain whether they are extending that pilot program or changing it to up the prices. These prices in this worksheet are based on just the plain 2015 prices quoted without any mitigation or agreement for the developers. So this is the worst that would be. This is the highest prices. But I would suggest that Legacy go to Caltrain and to Samtrans and see what they can dicker for. Even with using the 2015 figures, the developer could save money. If he's going to have, say, for instance, 202 subsidies of $20 a month to the tenants, then he's going to be out $48,480. But the Caltrain passes and the GO passes for Samtrans, you will see how the figures come out for less than that. So even at the worst situation, they should be able to come to a solution where they would be saving money for Legacy, but plus they would be saving money for the tenants, because the tenants wouldn't be just getting $20 a month in subsidy. They would be getting a pass for the year. So it doesn't make sense to me for the city to allow the developer to get by without at least exploring the possibility that everybody would win in the situation. So that would be under item 1 here. And under item 2 is considering including the bike riders. You know, in anything you get for pedestrian improvements, please include the bikers. That would be the second item. And so I again ask you to review your TDM management program. Thank you.
Bonnie?
Yes.
And I can ask the applicant too, but I'm sure you've heard the adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. These numbers seem incredible to me. For most people who want to purchase a monthly Caltrain pass for just 2 zones, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, for 3 zones for an adult, a monthly pass is $180. I know. And you're saying that Caltrain will...
That's what they quoted me today. And that's...
But 180... Your numbers are based on $180
a year.
A year.
I know. That
sounds impossible.
Well, it was for today, for 2014, it was $5 less.
Okay. It's not that I don't believe you. I absolutely believe you. It's just it sounds incredible.
I know.
Normally it would cost.
Well, I know, and for the pilot program under Caltrain, under $14,000 for a whole development sounds incredible too, doesn't it? But that was their pilot program. Okay. So all I'm asking is that Legacy investigate it. I'm not, it seems to me that we should be seeing that it's investigated.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Vandalos.
Good evening, Planning Commission members. I want to thank you guys for having a second meeting. I was out of town, couldn't make the first one, so I do appreciate the opportunity to discuss this project. One of the I've got a number of concerns, and they're mainly around Building 8 and landscaping. And I'm going to just basically start with additional trees. Additional trees to completely screen Building 8 from residential areas shall be added was one of the conditions. And it talked about putting additional trees on the berm. Since that discussion was had, a Caltrain, at least a draft EIR was put out about electrification, and in that EIR, they were actually going to cut all of the trees down from the berm. So if you guys were planning on planting additional trees, we're actually going to get a net loss of trees. And I bring that up specifically for Building 8 because there are only 3 or 6 trees to screen it. And this body was talking about actually shielding that building. So I think this is a very large disconnect and is one that really needs to be addressed before any approval. Acceptability of the landscaping was one of the conditions. So I do strongly urge that be discussed. Building 8, the off-street loading is right at the intersection at the opening of Montgomery Street. And that seems to be a very poor location for residents on Montgomery Street because we're going to have trucks coming in, loading, perhaps garbage coming in, and that noise is just going to reverberate right down the street. So I ask that we look at alternate locations. I'm sure there are many better places to place that. There's a lot of room there that ought to be used. Additionally, there was talk about the gross area of the building being reduced. I actually see a commercial net to gross area chart in that big packet. And if you add the total gross area with the deck area, it actually is over 30,000 feet. So I'm not sure that you can really approve the single loading. Frankly, I'd rather have no loading because of that noise. But I'm not. It seems like there's a discongruity there. So I ask you guys to look at that. I'm also concerned whether or not that loading area is still going to be not limited to only a loading space. I'm concerned about other uses there. But it really should be moved to reduce impact to the residents. I also noticed that the bike lockers are right behind Building 8. I think there are plenty of places to put bike lockers. I'm a big proponent of using bikes. However, putting them in a location which would not enable the planting of trees on the property, I think, is a very poor design choice. And I hope you guys would take a look at that and consider moving those. I'm also concerned about the phasing of the roadway improvements on El Camino. We've been undergoing a project that's been disrupting traffic on Old County Road, and I'm concerned that if we phase it and we create a situation where multiple years of poor traffic on El Camino occurs, all that traffic is going to be pushed onto Old County Road, and I'm very concerned about that, especially given that that road has been narrowed so significantly. So I'm not sure what can be done about that, but I do bring that up. Probably the biggest thing that I'm concerned about is that we lost an entire story on Building 8. We lost a story on the residential buildings. But we only lost maybe 7 feet maximum of height for Building 8. And somehow when you lose one story and you only lose 7 feet, that somehow seems kind of strange. And I was at the city council meeting where that final decision was made, and council actually quizzed staff about the height of 42 feet. And the intent of that 42 feet was for architectural elements But what I see in this design is the entire building the height is 42 feet across. So it's still a giant monolith. And that's the one building that really has not received the attention to detail and changes that the community has been requesting. So I'm seeing very, very little change to Building 8. Even though we lost a story, we've only lost 7 feet. So I'm requesting that the Planning Commission actually follows the intent and the spirit of council when they wanted to have that building removed and to only go up to 42 feet at certain areas to allow for architectural detail. So that was a distinct issue that was discussed by council, and I do not think that allowing Building 8 to be the 42 feet across its entire length is a good thing. I bring that up because there's so many things in this document, but proposed development, this is part of the EIR, and it says buildings 1, 2, 3 north of Holly Street and Building 8 are the most visible to eastern neighborhoods. So I think there's been some substantive changes and reductions in all of the buildings except for Building 8. So what we're seeing is a very small.
Mr. Vanderlos, if I could ask you just to finish up, please.
I'm almost there.
Okay, thank you.
So essentially, what's occurring here is we're getting very minimal changes in Building 8. We're losing trees, and the intent of this body and of City Council is not being met. And so I'm asking. My last sort of big point is the transformer for Building 8 is also located right at the opening of Montgomery Street, and I'm concerned about noise going into the community. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And my last speaker. Huh. I didn't notice it go out again. My last speaker is Mr. Hilborn. Let's see. You want to test the microphone and see what it...
Testing, check, 1, 2. 1, 2.
Really?
Still not working.
Huh. I can hear it. It sounds...
Okay,
yeah,
I
he's
think
definitely got
right.
some...
Yeah, kind of. I'll stay close to it.
I can hear it the whole time.
Is this part of my 2 minutes? No, just kidding. All right.
You get 4, and it hasn't started yet.
No, I probably won't need that much.
All right.
All right. We good to go?
Yep.
Okay. Tim Hilborn, 1052 Sylvan Drive. First of all, I'd like to thank the commission for having the second meeting so they can hear more public comment. Quickly, I just 2 things. First one is the use of landscaping. One thing that was under the condition for the EIR approval was the use of trees to block the significant views that we're going to have of these buildings, primarily buildings 1, 2, and 3. When I look at the packet that was handed out, primarily on page L-2.1 and L-2.1 on buildings 1 and 2, and L-2.2 on buildings 3 and 4. When I look along the berm, there's very little trees. There's a line of trees that go along, and then all of a sudden there's a huge space. Also, if you look along El Camino, there's way more trees along El Camino than there are along the back side of this. And this is something I would implore the Planning Commission to look at and ask that these plans be resubmitted with more trees in them. I know that we are going to have a meeting with the community and the GESC board. But if these are the plans that are going to be approved, I think they need to be adjusted because, with the condition for approval of the EIR, it was stated that there would be a lot more trees than what appear here. I don't know the exact numbers, but I have questions about those two. My last point is looking at the actual plans for the facade of the buildings, both commercial and residential, as far as the use of colors. I like the fact that they're earth tones. I like the fact that you're not using a lot of very tones that change. If you drive up and down El Camino and you look at a lot of these transit villages right now, you have these buildings that are, rust colored and then cream colored right next to each other. And to me, those look more like housing projects. So I do appreciate the use of those tones, and I would encourage the Planning Commission to approve the colors that are being used in those kinds of things. So again, just the trees, we really need to look at that. Everything that Mr. Vandella said about the trees, I second with that. I just want to be on record mentioning that. So thank you for your time.
Where were you specifically referring to the trees?
Okay, so on...
Can I tell you that is not the plan. That is what was approved by City Council.
Yeah,
and that actually shows a lot of trees. The new one that we've got down here shows very few trees. We'll get to that.
Is it this one right here? Is this the one that you're talking about, Scott? This is the one that I got from the last meeting.
That is the one, yes. That's the one that we have the large plans of.
Okay, and is that the one that you're considering approving?
That is the one that we are considering approving tonight.
So, yeah, that's my whole point. With this one, it really needs to be looked at, and trees need to be added. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I don't have any additional speaker slips. I'm assuming there's no one else who wishes to speak. With that, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bergman,
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters,
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Yes.
Chair Silberman.
Yes. So now it's time for commissioner comment. Who would like to start?
Through the chair?
Yes.
I think it would be a good idea to allow the applicant to respond to some of the questions. They haven't spoken, and there was a number of comments about the design, and it may be appropriate to let the architect respond to some of the questions from David Crabb and other ones. Just a suggestion.
I appreciate that. I figured to the extent that we had questions about specific questions that were asked, we would direct those to the applicant. I'm not saying that we're not going to want to ask all of them, but I figured those who are interested in particular areas can raise those with the applicant or with staff, unless the applicant wants to address them all seriatim. Okay. So
it's okay. I wrote most of them down. So
I have them all written down as well. So
we're going to go through most of them anyway.
Okay. Do you want to start, Scott?
I'm happy to start. I'm going to sort of go backwards first and ask a lot of questions that have already been answered. So I'm hoping that whoever the applicant would like to come up and maybe it's going to be different people for different questions. But we'll start with phasing of the roadway improvements. And maybe that's a question for staff. And it is a concern for the residents that live on the east side because they have essentially just gone through an entire year or so of Old County being torn up, and there has not been any reduction in the speed limit on that street yet. That it is a concern that traffic will be pushed onto Old County from El Camino multiple times. As many as 8 or 9, because each time a building is built, they can shut down a piece of El Camino to work on that small piece of El Camino. So can we make the phasing in 2 pieces? Can we make it north of Holly as one phase and south of Holly as another?
That is the condition of approval. If you look at condition number 19,
Okay.
it says from the northern end of the project through to the southern side of Holly Street would be one phase. And then when the buildings 5, 6, 7, 8 were done, in conjunction with that, then it would be constructed from the south side of Hawley through to the frontage of Building 8.
Okay. And then another one for the potential transit center.
That's correct.
So there would be 3 shutdowns of Hawley, potentially. I mean, not Hawley, of El Camino.
Well, I don't know about shutdowns, but there would be 3 periods of construction.
Construction. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about, I'm just going back through some of the things. I heard the comments on trucks on Hawley and bikes on Hawley. Hawley isn't really part of this. That's something you're going to have to direct to the city council. But we heard you. Yeah. Again, shuttles are not part of this either because that was taken out and is no longer a piece of it. Let's see. Okay, phasing. So the thoroughfare behind the backside of Building 5 and 6. So when you come down the steps off the Caltrain platform, are people going to have access to Hawley Street from there? Or are they going to have to walk underneath? Because right now, a lot of people use that to get access coming down. Anybody that's going north and lives on the north side of Hawley on the east side, they come down those steps and they just walk along the back and then they cut through underneath Hawley Street and go that way. They will be required to go and walk around or down the ramp and underneath the, I guess I'm asking, is there going to be a fence at that end along Hawley Street behind Building 5? You don't have a fence.
Currently, there's not a fence proposed there. There is a steep slope and landscape, so they would be, I guess that's a little bit of the condition now, so they'd have to cut through landscape, but we have, I think, better alternatives for pedestrians than cutting through the landscape.
That may be something that you want to consider because right now there's a lot of people who actually use that as a way to get through.
There is, as designers, designing a path, it would have to be an accessible path. Yeah. And because of the steep grades there and the landscaping there, essentially if we were to provide a ramp that was accessible to get down there, the landscaping would be gone. So we have the sidewalk along El Camino, or you can go under the ramp. Would be better alternatives, I think, to get across Hawley Street. So.
Okay. Palm trees. So when you come out from underneath the walkway underneath the railroad tracks, there's about 4 feet, and then you hit the palm trees. And those, so it's, I'm talking landscaping here, okay? So you know what I'm talking about? And they're the existing palm trees. And it forces people to go right around the palm trees to a small sidewalk on the side there. And I noticed that you have a small sidewalk on the left-hand side also, but you seem to have a series of stone monuments or something to sort of cordon off the patio area. Is there anything that can be done so that the bikes and the walkers that come through there have more of a straight path to get to the through that rather than sort of running around, especially the bikes, because one of the problems is that you're pushing bikes and pedestrians through a very constricted area.
Sure. But I want to speak to it too, because when we listened to the many comments back when the PD was constructed, one of the important issues was creating an environment that didn't encourage bikes to have a straight right-of-way to blow through there at 90 miles an hour. It is not intended to be a bicycle area. It's intended to be a pedestrian area. So we want people off the bikes and walking through there, and we don't want to create a racetrack there. So it's very friendly, and I'll let him speak more to it, but more friendly, more toward pedestrians than to bikes.
And one of the other things in there is the surface levels.
Surfaces will be replaced.
Okay.
The lumpiness will go away.
The lumpiness.
One of the things that was talked about last month was there's a corner. I think a member of the public talked about it. There are large planters actually at that area that they're about the same size. We don't have to do those in those corners. If we took them away, you would have more room between those palms and Building 8, for example, so you wouldn't have that pedestrian issue. And it's not like you'll have. It won't turn it into a bicycle raceway. It'll only add maybe 3 more feet, but that's almost 100% more space that was there before. And in the previous plans, remember, we were moving those palms out of there, and I think it's much better to leave them alone and redo the paving so it's all smooth and you'll be able to walk on both sides of the trees essentially now. And I think Jeff's comment's fair about we're trying to encourage it as a bike route. But
that's fine. That's an area I'd like to see something done, because it is an inconvenience all the way around, and there's a lot of people that walk through there.
That can be handled, I think.
Okay, let's take up some of David's issues. Can the roofs be used for solar panels? Okay. Obviously, there's no plans for solar panels now, but or are there?
We're still in the design phases early on for that, but provisions would be made to accommodate them in the future at some point, should it make sense. But yes, there is space on the roof that would accommodate them.
And his question about tile versus shingles?
Currently, we have proposed shingles on the roof.
Okay. And then the last one that he talked about, that at least that I caught, was the entrance through the courtyard and what difference that would make.
Sure. I spoke a little bit about it in the presentation. We have some courtyards that are active and some that are passive courtyards. I think the main difference between this project and Pacific Hacienda, which we refer to a lot, is the street frontage that we have is a much more intense street frontage than the street frontage at Pacific Hacienda. So in creating some of these inactive private courtyards that are meant to be looked out upon, we have windows from the units facing out upon them. But because the distance between the building and what's a fairly intense right-of-way on El Camino, we thought that the deeper courtyards could be more active and do allow circulation through them. Some of the shallower courtyards are more passive, just to provide more of a buffer for the residents around those courtyards. So there's some of them are active, some of them are passive. And then we have the large active courtyard between buildings 2 and 3.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that?
Please.
So, I don't know if this was Mr. Crabb's rationale for asking the question of why shingles versus tile, but I mean, my understanding is that tile is more environmentally friendly because it doesn't need to be replaced as often as shingle. And so, I mean, so why? Why did you choose shingle? Was it a weight issue? Was it a cost issue?
There's a weight issue and a cost issue on the project, to be honest. There's a lot of things in this project that are fairly unique that make this project more expensive than a typical project would be. We have the fairly intense sound mitigation. We have a lot of infrastructure improvements along the frontages. And shingles are less expensive than concrete tiles. In terms of the environmentally friendliness of the two materials, I'm not exactly sure. The energy that's required to create cement to make the tiles is actually a fairly intensive process, and so I'm not sure how that weighs out in terms of energy consumption, making shingles versus making tiles.
Is that your way of being nice to me? And do you know, as a matter of fact,
actually, I don't know, but I do know that cement is one of the most energy-intensive products that you can make, the production of cement. And so I haven't seen studies weighing the production of cement versus the production of asphalt composition shingles, but it's not as simple as the replacement cycle. You have to consider the energy that actually goes into making the materials themselves. And so I think it's a more complicated question than I can address, but I know that it's not just as simple as tiles last 50 years and comp shingles last 20 to 30 years.
But the answer to why is price.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the solar panels, your answer suggested that that the developer has made a decision not to put on solar panels, even though it could, because...
No, it's something that has to be studied. We call it, it would be a different phase of design for us in terms of how to meet our energy requirements as the project overall. And there's a lot of different factors that can go into meeting your energy requirements. And part of that can be photovoltaics. Part of that could be a thermal solar system. Part of it could be more efficient equipment that conditions the units themselves. Increased insulation. There's a whole family of products that work together to meet the energy requirement. And so it's too early for me to say whether PV is going to be one of those components or not. It's possible, but I can't tell you right now that it is. But what I can tell you is that we will, whether they're installed at the beginning of the project or not, there will be provisions that they could be added at any time.
Okay. Now we're going to attempt to address some of Mr. Vandello's comments, especially concerning, at least for him, all of the potential noise making items that seem to be located right at the end of Montgomery Street on the other side of the berm. So, garbage, transformer, loading area, all of those seem to be located in such a way that they could potentially create noise impacts on the residents that live on Holly Street. And so are there possibilities to, not Holly Street, Montgomery Street, are there Yeah, but we've had issues in the neighborhood of the garbage trucks at 3 or 4 in the morning picking up dumpsters and slamming them down. And so I think that's what he's getting at as far as noise impacts, not necessarily during the normal working hours, but outside the normal working hours. If truck deliveries could, say, be limited to after 6 a.m., or garbage could be limited to after 6 a.m., things like that. And is that, staff, is that something that we can add as a condition?
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay. Say, not between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., something like that. Okay. Yeah. And they not only do they do that, but they come and they drop the dumpster, okay, and then they pick it up again and drop it a second time, just for fun.
Only twice I asked
Yeah.
specifically that they drop it in front of your house 3 times. It's
Yeah.
only twice?
It's not me. It's,
I have to
but
make that call
I hear
again.
the complaints. Okay, let's see. Addressing the only 7 feet were lopped off building 8, and is there any way to? I mean, when I looked at that, I see 16 feet for the first floor, 16 feet for the second floor, and then I see 10 feet of roof for building 8. And so my question is that doesn't seem like it seems a little bit excessive for the height of the area around Building 8. And I wonder if there's a way to
Before the applicant addresses that, I'm actually curious whether staff has any comments one way or another about basically the thrust of Mr. Vandalos's comment was that what the developer did was inconsistent with the city council's direction, and I'm wondering whether staff has a view of that.
I think the way that the city council's direction was to allow for a maximum height of 42, but recognizing that maybe the whole building shouldn't be 42 feet and that the roof lines would project over maybe the top of the flat parapet part, and that was to allow for those roof elements to project up above the ceiling height of the upper floor. So when staff looked at the design that is before you, if you look carefully, you'll notice that the building is not all 42 feet. In fact, there's only one, I think, and of course the architect can clarify, but I think there's only one portion of the building that rises to 42 feet where at the maximum extent of the roof. And the rest of the building actually varies in height and is lower than that. And so I'll let the architect talk to that, but staff believes that it does meet the intent of what council was directing at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and basically I'll just echo Al's comments. If you have your drawings in front of you on A3.8, are the elevations for Building 8. And there's a few reference lines on there that I think would help understand how the building height is related there. You can see there's one point of the building that is approaching the 42-foot height limit, and that's...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need you to speak a little louder for me.
Oh, sorry. On A3.8 are the elevations for Building 8, and there's one point of the building which is a tower element that was largely unchanged from the previous design. In the previous design, the bulk of Building 8 was actually taller than that little corner tower element. Now the majority of the building all of the building is lower than that corner tower element. So you can see that there's a dashed line that indicates the 42-foot height limit, and it only approaches that at that one corner element, and the rest of the building is 8 to 10 feet below that line. Another thing that, in reading the drawings, when you're looking at the roof forms, keep in mind that these roofs have an eave that's even lower than that. The eave line is largely what's red as you're walking along the sidewalk and relating to these buildings, and then the roof slopes away from that point. So even though you're seeing the maximum height of these roofs, those are actually the maximum point at a point sloping away from the face of the building. So I think the mass of the building is much smaller than it was in the previous design.
So when I look at it, and the west elevation is looking at it from the west side, right? And the east elevation is looking at it from the east side.
Correct.
Okay. It looks to me like Can you tell me roughly what the roof height of so there is sort of a dip in the center?
Correct. So that's, if you look to the left, you can sort of scale that there's a 38-foot height limit, or height call out at the top of plate for the tower. And if you just draw that line straight across, we're looking at like 38 feet.
That's under 30.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 38 feet or 36 feet?
Oh, sorry, that is 36 feet.
That whole section that's really closer to 32, 34.
Correct. And then the eave is even lower than that. The eave would be really more like at 30 feet. So the 30-foot eave line is what you'd largely perceive for most of the building height.
I guess that's not as apparent on the east elevation as it is on the west elevation. It almost looks like from the west elevation that from the east, when you look at it from the east side, that it's almost 42 feet for a good percentage of the project, whereas if you look at the elevation from the west facing El Camino, it tends to be lower than what you see on the east side facing the tracks. Okay, and I think that was the concern that Mr. Vandellos was presenting, was that the intent, I think, was to lower it closer to the neighborhood, and you could have the height closer to El Camino, closer to the downtown.
But yeah, that's correct. As looking at the east elevation, towards the left side of the elevation, heading further south, is where the building starts to step down again, and that's more towards the residential portion of the neighborhood on the east side, versus on the right-hand side is across from commercial on the east side. So, and again, even though there is that portion on the right-hand side of the east elevation is taller than on the El Camino elevation, it's still much shorter than it was in the previous design.
And can I, Mr. Chairman, ask a question of the architect as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the height is of this parapet wall right here, just as it reaches the bottom of the roof right here?
At the eave, it's about 32 feet.
And so that's 32 feet.
Yeah, and in the center is about 30 feet to the eave line. And that's what I was explaining, is if you're, as a pedestrian, in interacting with the building, largely what you perceive is that eave line, which is much lower than a parapet would be.
Yes.
And then the green portion of the roof is sloping away, so it's not a vertical roof. That green portion is sloping, away from you. So I don't think you would perceive that height as a vertical surface. It's a slope receding away.
And that looks to be what, 40 some odd feet? 40 feet?
The height is 39 to 40 feet on the right-hand portion, and then it would drop down to probably 35 feet.
Okay.
And if you could also clarify for me that this, gosh darn it. So I'm trying to use this pointer. That this portion of the building is really read closer to the berm, and this area is not much farther back, but could you tell me how much farther back this portion of the building is? Because what I'm inquiring about is I believe that this is the elevation that would be most visible to Montgomery Street right here.
Yeah, I can look that up in the plan, but just to point out that the portion of the building that you're looking at there is actually symmetrical with that portion on the facing El Camino. So the heights are, for that portion of the building, actually are the same as on the El Camino side, just to give a point of reference.
Yes. And so...
so that's about, it's about a 30-inch recess.
A 30-inch recess here, back here?
Yes.
Okay, so it steps back 2.5 feet or so, or almost 3. So this really is the portion of the building that would be red, and it would be probably just the top corner of this, perhaps, you would be able to see. I think when, although I don't believe we have it loaded up this evening, as you may recall, we had the visual simulations that were done, and we looked at it from Montgomery Street. And as I recall in those visual simulations, you can only see, well, you could primarily see this corner of the building and maybe a little bit over here, I think, from Montgomery at an angle, because Montgomery is kind of down here, and there's a building on the corner as well. So with this reduced height, just in my estimation, with this perspective, you wouldn't perceive much of the building, perhaps a little bit of this corner and in the roof line. But as the architect noted, the roof line goes away from the viewer, and so it's much less of a visual impact. And then something that was also brought up was the landscaping that we can talk about as part of the screening of this building as well.
But I agree that you may not be able to see much of it from really far up on Montgomery Street. But actually, as you're walking up Montgomery Street, you can see Pacific Hacienda. So it's a matter of perspective. As you're further down Montgomery Street, you will see more of the building. Okay, so if you get down to Bayport Court, you will see most of the second floor up above the building at the end of the corner of Montgomery and Old County. So, okay.
Related to this, how much time do you think you have, Scott? I mean, my goal is to finish tonight.
Mine is too.
Okay, so how much time do you have? Because if you feel like you have more than, say, a half an hour, maybe I'll exhaust everybody else and we can end with you. What do you think?
Let me finish this page,
Okay.
and then I'll save the other two for. And one whole page is about trees.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. May I make a small request?
I'll judge how small it is. Let's go.
A 2-minute recess so I can use the washroom?
I can't say no to that. So let's take a 2-minute break.
Thank you very much, guys.
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Snickers bar.
We can, maybe we'll mute it for now. Hold on a second.
believe that if I could, get folks' attention, folks can finish up their conversations. We're going to restart the meeting with page 12 of 27.
No, not that many more. You'd
of
be,
Scott
you'd be-
Marster's
you'd be surprised.
treatise on the transit village.
Yes, just another quick question. The stone monument in front that commemorates the train station, that's staying? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was not disappearing. And then I can stop now, and then
I mean, how much more do you think you have?
Well, I got a whole page on trees, so let's leave that for later.
Why don't we save trees and go to page whatever?
So I just want to double check with staff. After the project is built, there is going to be a noise study done again, right? I thought that was part of the condition, was that there was going to be a noise study prior to and post to make sure that there was no increase in noise?
No, I don't recall that as a condition of approval. The issue of noise has to do with making sure that the building construction will attenuate for the indoor areas of the apartments and the courtyards, but there isn't something that measures. You're talking about the whole issue of the reflective noise?
Yes.
No, there is not a condition that deals with that.
There is no condition that deals with that. Okay. We're not going to talk about the transit lot today, but I just want to make sure that when we do, we address the handicap parking spaces in that lot. And then we talked about the landscaping south of Arroyo, and I know that Samtrans is responsible for that landscaping down there, and I hope that when the transit piece comes back, the transit center piece comes back, that we will have a plan for the rest of that property down there, because I see as part of the development plan that nothing is going to happen to that area down there. And I think that it would be a shame for us to approve this entire development and have no plan for 50% of the frontage of El Camino. And I'm not expecting the developer to do it or Samtrans to do it, but I think that the city has to have some sort of plan for the area south of Arroyo. And I don't know what's going to happen down there, but I think that I would like to see that as part of the plan, or as additional information when the transit center comes back. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. And then I think I have one last issue before trees, and that is I'm still trying to figure out the transit passes, okay? And it looked like for $38,000, you could have Go passes and Samtrans passes. But I read as part of the development plan that after year one, really the contribution from the developer is $12,000. So that's not going to pay for those transit. So maybe in year one, that can be a piece of it. But I think that's something that yes, I'd love for you to come up and explain a little bit more about this, if that's okay with Mr. Chairman.
It's fine.
I'm just trying to figure out where the $38,000 comes from, because I know the developer's portion and what they've agreed to pay is limited to $12,000. Am I right in that? Let's let her speak, and then I'll let you. Then, yeah.
I was under the impression that they were saying that they would pay $20 a month.
Yes.
For each resident.
No,
the first year.
It's 50 residents, right? That's what I read in here.
You guys changed that.
I don't believe we changed that. I believe it was left at, from what I read from the
50. So then the figures would only be a quarter of.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize.
No, that's what I'm trying to get at.
But that's why I put every figure down, so that you could check everything.
To figure out where you got the $38,000 from, because I knew the developer had only agreed to 12.
Well, if you extended it as it should be for each person that wanted a pass, each tenant,
then it would be the 38.
That would be the 48.
Okay, that's fine.
Isn't it 40-something?
Well, it would be 48, but they could do it for 38, according to your numbers.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. But, all right, well, maybe they could do it for 50 people at the...
And I don't know if you'd get the same pricing at 50 people.
No. All I'm saying is I want them to investigate with Samtrans and with Caltrain.
And what I wanted to do was to see if
I'm
there's...
glad you clarified that, because
I wanted to
that's
see if
my
there's-
mistake.
Yeah, if there's some flexibility in there so that they could use that money in the best way, and we don't lock them into a $20 per person.
No. I said they could use the figures however. However, the main thing is not in that letter, and that's reminding you that pilot plan that ends at the end of this year, unfortunately, gave it to you for less than $14,000.
I can't use it this year.
So go fight for it. There we go. For it.
Okay.
For next year.
Can you have the buildings up by December 31st?
No.
Am I right? I just want to make sure. Is the $12,000 number right?
I have no idea.
Okay.
There's a condition. There are a lot of conditions of approval. There is a condition approval related to us supporting and encouraging the people to get this habit. And the other thing is we've started looking at these things every year. We've been through this for the last 10 years. These programs change every year. We can't contemplate what they are. We will try and optimize whatever it is. And there may be a point in time where there's a program attractive enough that we, independent of mandates from government, may find that it's beneficial for us to buy passes for all of our residents, because it's something we can offer for a limited cost that it has a big intrinsic value to them. So the market will prevail, and we will do what's most efficient and most cost effective.
That's all we're asking is for you to look at it.
We will.
Yeah. It's part of the TDM. That's where I got the numbers from. Okay. I just wanted to clear that up. The only thing I have left is trees. So.
Okay. So, Angela, do you have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything?
I do.
All right, you're up.
Am I big?
You are enormous.
Sorry, guys.
Your head is bigger than Bruce Bocce's right now.
So I have a few. Number one, I wanted to ask staff and Legacy, what are the other alternatives and ideas that you guys have been kicking around in regards to the bike paths? Since I'm obviously pretty convinced that you guys looked for a solution within the project, what will be the solution? What are some of the ideas that you guys have as far as working together to find an alternative to that?
Yeah. So, hi, this is Sherry, the architect.
Hi, Sherry.
So, in terms of the bike circulation, we now have behind the buildings 1 through 4, we have essentially it's a paver drive aisle that is continuous behind those buildings, and so that is a rideable surface, which we didn't have before, which is continuous behind those buildings. Now, when you get towards Holly Street, adjacent between buildings 3 and 4, if you're bike riding, I would think that you would come back out to El Camino at that location because of the grade separation at Holly. So you could ride behind the buildings 1 through 3, and then you would come in front of building 4 to cross Holly Street at the intersection.
And then, so then you'd cross the intersection and be able to go back behind the buildings if you needed to?
Well, I guess it's the same issue. There starts to be the grade separation at Holly, so I think you would go in front of buildings 5 and 6, and then into the station there.
Thank you for that clarification. This question is for staff. Staff, can you just clarify what the roof material is at Pacific Hacienda? It is a tile, right? Yeah. Okay, I wanted to make sure I was right about that. And then Sherry, I'm sorry, can I have you come back up? Sherry, I understand that your guys' decision to go with a different roof material was of course cost. Can you give me an idea of how cost prohibitive it would be to use tile versus the material you chose?
Actually, I don't have those numbers. I don't.
Ballpark?
Sorry, I could. Yeah.
So no even crazy estimate.
Yeah. Maybe Jeff has an estimate.
Jeff
is the one that pays
the crazy estimate guy.
Yeah, I'm the crazy estimate. I'm the crazy.
Estimate it for me, please.
Yeah, the architect would never know that answer to that question.
Okay.
If they told you, then you'd have to put a 2 or 3x behind whatever number they say because that's only going to cost you $20,000 extra, and the next thing you know, you spend $60,000. I'm going to say $500,000.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, just making a note. Can you walk me through, sorry, this is probably for Sherry again, the indentation and the depth on the west side of Building 3, particularly because Building 3 doesn't have a courtyard. I just want to understand the depth of that building on the west side. And then I would probably want to talk about the east side depth and indentations just after that.
So the indentation at there is a small courtyard at Building 3. It's one of the passive courtyards, so it's not a circulation path, but it would be landscaped for the residents facing and for people walking by. And I'd say it's about, I don't have the dimension on the plans, but I'd say it's about 26 or 27 feet deep.
Okay.
It's on A2.3 is the plan view. 2.3.
I'm sorry, A3.3?
2.3.
A2.3. All right, let me get there.
Wrong way here. Backwards. There we go. Almost.
Okay, I'm there. Thank you.
There we go. Right, so you can see the indentation in the middle of Building 3 there. And so the width of that is 47 feet wide, and it's about 26 or 27 feet deep. Yeah, and then the curb is about 16, 18 feet in front of, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then the next thing about indentation is more of a comment, and I'm hoping will be addressed when Scott goes into his conversation about trees a little bit later. The indentation on the east side, of course, is much flatter by design, but it seems very flat to me, much more so than our first run at it. I'd be less concerned about that if I were confident that it would be very, very densely landscaped, whether that's through reassurances on the berm, reassurances elsewhere. I just wanted to make that comment that the indentation concerns me on the east elevation, but of course if it's completely landscaped and very well covered, I could be convinced to be unconcerned about that.
Sure. And And can we go to the, if you wouldn't mind, we can go to the elevations for that building on A3.3. So looking at the drawing number 2 on this sheet, which is the east-facing elevation of Building 3, so essentially the flat portion of the building where the garages are is that the first level is essentially screened by the berm, which is why we located the parking facing the berm. And so we spend a lot of time really on the upper portion of the building to create some height variation and some difference in roof forms, different window patterns, et cetera, to create some interest along the east side of that building, which is, so it's the upper part of the building is what you would see from the east side. So there's less in and out, but there's more up and down, if that makes sense.
I see what you mean. Thank you for that, Sherry. And then, let's see.
This is Jeff Bird. I just want to make one other comment, just as a bigger background comment. The original PD had buildings in these areas that were actually longer. They've been broken up to be, I believe, other than Building 1, each one is smaller. Building 3, which was the smallest, has become slightly larger, but it was by far the smallest. To bring the scale of these buildings down, we went beyond what the PD had us do, which was 3 stories on top of a podium, and by eliminating the podium, brought the buildings down another 5 feet by eliminating the podium. And the other thing is the change in design also moved the buildings 15 to 18 feet further away from the east side. In the same time, we were reducing them, and we've created these forms. But the prior buildings had similar articulations to them, but again, they were bigger, they were closer, and they were taller, even as consistent with the PD. And Paul can speak more to what happens, maybe when Scott asks his questions about trees, but as you move it further away, and instead of having the trees very close up, you move the trees further away. They're now much larger trees with bigger canopies, and because of what I'll call the parallax effect, because they're closer to you and now 25 feet away from the building instead of 8 feet away, they actually do more screening.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jeff. That actually really helps. And then I finally have just one more quick comment before we move the conversation to somebody else. Just a clarification on my comments on color in the previous meeting. I wasn't necessarily going for a giant rust-looking choppy color, but I do want to warn against 6 buildings of medium beige. My preference would be closer to off-white than medium beige, much closer to Pacific Hacienda. So I just wanted to make a note of that. And that's it for now.
Okay. Ms. Bergman, how about you?
I want to go back to the letter from Bob Black, and he speaks about the requirement for the developer to provide 15% of the rental units below market rate. And as I understand it, the city council actually changed that, right, to a different mix, which is 10% affordable, 5% moderate, and 5% at low income. So as far as I know, this is something that is out at this point. That's already been determined and has been set in stone by city council. We're not going to be able to make any changes to that. So I just wanted to respond to that letter. And then the other thing I had was the up to comment about the trees. So when we get into the trees, we can discuss that.
Okay. Actually, we could address that now. The actual condition says that if they don't put 70 trees, then the balance of those trees are made available into the neighborhood. So there will be 70 trees, but because of the issues of electrification and so forth, we didn't want to put it to a point where it's like they couldn't fit them, and so the condition of approval says they have to put in 70 trees, up to 70 on the berm, but if there's not room or however that works out, they still have to provide those into that eastern side of the berm area, but it would be into the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think it's time to move on to landscaping.
Okay. Can you put up the landscaping pictures? What is it? We can start with L 2.1.
So while they're doing that, Jeff, just so you know, and so that you have an opportunity, I intend to propose to the commission that there be a requirement for some form of tile roof. If you want to make another sort of, and you don't have to do it right now, but if you want to think about whether you want to make another pinch to try and convince me not to, I mean, I'd be happy to hear it. I don't want to, come out of the blue with it. It's primarily an aesthetic issue. As I understand, the Pacific Hacienda has it. I think these buildings are designed in such a way that it would look appropriate on these buildings. And I'm not saying they have to be clay or cement. I believe there's also metal whatever. I mean, I'm not going to say that it has to be a particular material. It's a style issue. It's a design issue. But we can take that up again later. And just because I like it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the commissioners are going to feel like it's necessary.
Since you put that in, I'm going to ask the question: can you put solar panels on tile roofs? That's why I'm asking the question.
I don't think you would want to do that. It's theoretically possible, but the way the buildings are designed, there's actually behind the sloped areas of the roofs that you would see are flat areas that would accommodate some equipment.
Okay.
So the idea would be to reduce the visual impact of solar panels should they occur on the roofs. But there is a flat portion of the roof on each of the buildings that would be screened essentially by the sloped roofs.
Okay. So let's move on to landscaping. The thing that really struck me the most about the change in landscaping was the significant reduction in the number of trees that are behind each of the buildings. And we look at building 1, which is roughly 200 feet, and we have 2 trees. Now, I understand that we're going to put trees on the berm. We've had trees on the berm. Unfortunately, in the past, we left it up to Samtrans to decide what those trees were, and they gave us the ugliest looking trees that you could possibly imagine. They are no more than 4 feet tall, and they look like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree at best. And so there's got to be something done as far as determining what types of trees go on the berm, okay, as well as the concern about the fact that at some point all of those trees may disappear due to electrification. I'm not sure whether they can put trees in there based on the draft EIR for electrification, and we actually have. Let's scan through this. These L2.1. So behind building 2, there's 3, maybe 4 trees. If you go to L2.2, there's 2 trees behind building 3. Again, building 2 is 300 feet long, and there's maybe 4 trees. Building 3 is 200 feet long. There's 2 trees. Building 4 is 300 feet long, and it has 3 trees. And we know from the electrification, and I'll show you that in a minute, that all of these redwood trees along the back, they're all going. So let's go to Building 5. Building 5, all of these trees behind Building 5 are going, the redwoods. So that leaves 2 behind Building 5, none behind Building 6. Can we go to 2.4? None behind Building 7. That may be acceptable, but we have 6 behind Building 8. We also know from the electrification draft EIR that all of the redwoods and all of the poplar trees are all disappearing. So the idea that these trees are going to screen these buildings from the neighborhoods just doesn't hold water. So we're going to need to significantly increase the landscaping for these particular buildings. And I actually liked Mr. Vandello's suggestion to move the bike lockers away from Building 8. And the other thing that I noticed is that the sidewalk behind Building 8 is anywhere from 15 to 20 feet wide. So I'm not sure that you're going to be able to tell me that you can't put any more trees there. Let's take a look. Lisa, can we go to the website that I talked about? And I've given the planning commissioners a copy of a piece of the draft tree inventory and canopy assessment for the draft EIR for electrification. And the estimated number of trees in San Carlos that they're planning on removing is 78. The estimated number of trees to prune are 153. So when the other piece of this is that only trees that are in residential areas are going to be replaced somewhere else. And I'm not sure from all of this where those trees are going to be replaced. Are they going to be replaced somewhere else in San Carlos, or are they going to be replaced somewhere on the east side? So I'm a little hesitant about some of this. Did you get to? It's a long URL, yeah. So I'll be there. Okay, sorry.
Do you have other, I mean, is that cover it, basically, the trees behind the buildings, or is there something else while they're bringing up the website?
No, it's really the trees behind the buildings.
Well, the website is being, I mean, are you looking for a response from the applicant, or?
I'm talking partly to the applicant. I'm talking partly to the other planning commissioners because.
David, perhaps I can make a clarification on a comment earlier at this point.
Okay.
That leads into this conversation.
Okay.
I don't think I was clear earlier when I mentioned my concerns with the east side indentations, because I initially started talking about Building 3 on the west facing elevation. My concerns indentation-wise or depth articulation-wise were really more with Building 4, 5, and 6 on the east side. The other buildings, those are the ones that are my main concern as looking too flat from the east side. Though I do appreciate Jeff's comments, I'm interested to see to hear how the conversation continues around landscaping as it applies particularly to those buildings. Thank you.
From what I've seen, there are no trees behind Well, there's 2 behind building 5, if I remember correctly, and none behind 6 or 7. Okay, so page 95. Okay, 94, 95. Oh. It should be. No, you should, if you just 2-48, so go back up to A2-45. Should be San Carlos, okay? So this essentially tells us from the draft DIR, and this was not available when we looked at landscaping in the past. And it's also interesting that a lot of trees, if you look at what was shown in the, for a picture in the planned development, there are huge numbers of trees all along the back side of all of these buildings, okay? You know, I look at building 1 and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 10 trees behind building 1 in the original picture, in the original development plan. That's gone down to 2. And there's, you know, 2, 4, 6, there's at least a dozen, if not 15 for building 2, which is 300 feet long. That's gone down to 3 trees.
Does the parking prohibit the trees? Is that why there's a reduction?
At some point, I probably should answer some of this because you're going to go down each one of them.
I mean, here's the thing. Mr. Marsters thinks there's not enough trees, and so
well, you know, one of the things you're doing is using this tree as an innate object that's the same on both plans. It's not. The original plan, we were using mostly pencil trees, skinny, you know, Italian cypress, junipers, calling them all trees now because that's all that would fit in those spaces. Now what we're using they're mostly sycamores on the plan. They're trees that can grow 50 to 60 feet wide and 50 to 60 feet tall. Most of anything that we had in the previous plans would not achieve those kind of heights, certainly not the widths.
I'm sorry, can you speak up into the microphone more?
I don't think I can. All right. All right.
I'm afraid the microphone is going in and out.
I have my mouth almost touching it now. I don't know. That's about as loud as, and I can go a little higher volume maybe, but So you know they're not the same thing. It's like using stories in residential versus stories in commercial. You know they mean something completely different. So while you're correct in the quantities, mostly there's 3 trees behind building 1, but okay. There's definitely fewer trees in this plan, but they're as we said before, they all have they have wide planting spaces that they're in, and they are closer to you, the viewer. Looking across, and we never intended, even in the other plan, to completely screen the buildings out. I mean, the people that live here will have views as well. The idea was to break down the mass of the building, so interrupt the building mass. That's what this plan will do as well. We feel that this actually has more chance of working faster because we have more room for these trees to grow, and these trees are trees that can achieve significant height. Behind building 8 are sweet gums on the plan now, which are tall growing, fairly wide growing trees too. Not quite as wide as the sycamores, but they're planted closer together. All along the backs of the buildings is rife with utilities. There's fiber optic lines and other communications ducts, and they wind their way around. You know, unfortunately, they're not straight lines. You know, in one place it's okay, and in another place it's not okay because they sort of do that. So we've tried to find those places that can work. And as we work on the plans, one of our goals is to see if we can get any more trees in, we'll do it. But there's a balance of the surface parking, which is back there now, and which we need to preserve in order to have the correct parking count for the project, as well as the various utilities that are either existing or proposed. For the most part, the utilities that are proposed that can be moved elsewhere have been moved elsewhere, and the plans reflect that. We had storm drain lines in the way. We're moving them out of the way, so they'll be out in the drive aisle so they don't affect where trees are. So that's been the goal. behind Building 8, we had 3 trees on the plan that you were counting from, I think, and there's 6 there now. So that's one place where we actually have more trees, and they're bigger. There are utility issues there as well. The widths that you're talking about, some of which are required to get access to the back of the building, and also there's a significant pedestrian way from where the bus drop-off will be, on the south side of Building 8 to allow people to walk in. We're constantly looking for this as well, because it's not, our goal to plant as few trees as possible. There's no mandate there. We're trying to do as much as we possibly can and get the biggest scale we can. So that's been our goal.
I still think that we need more than 2 trees behind some of these buildings. I mean, I think that how long is it going to take for these trees to be 50 feet wide?
Well, that's
putting a 24-inch box tree. It might be 3 feet wide.
4 or 5. Yeah.
4 or 5.
They grow. They can grow 6 or 8 feet a year. Some of those trees. It depends on how happy they are.
Probably not 6 or 8 feet wide.
A tree. 10 years in, those sycamores will probably be 30 feet tall and 12, 14 feet wide, maybe 15 feet wide. Again, this is probably in the wild estimate department. I should let Jeff do it, but it's still wild. It's still an estimate. Maybe in 10 years' time from a 24-inch box.
Using your numbers, 10 years down the road, those 2 trees behind Building 1 are going to be a total of 30 feet of the 200 feet of the building.
There's 3 trees behind Building 1.
Well, there's one that's way off to the side.
It's part of your view. Your view is angular. The view is not something.
I understand.
The view is not an elevational 90-degree view. So
I'm talking 200 feet of building face. Okay, if we're going to start talking angular, we're looking at 300 feet or 400 feet for these buildings for the angular views. Okay, so we can add a tree in, but it ends up being the same.
As I said, the object was to break up the mass of the buildings, not to screen the buildings completely. So that was our goal. So.
A couple other things I want to point out, and maybe Paul will remember, and we also have a rendering of the back side of these buildings that hopefully will get up there soon. There are also smaller scale trees which are on the same scale as the trees that were initially contemplated that occur along the edges of the buildings behind them where the garages are. So they don't show up very well in these images, but when you see some of Sherry's perspectives, you see that there are 2 layers. Now, those are the same. See, those are the same trees that you see here. Those are the same trees that we had there before. We have fewer of those, but more of the bigger trees in those locations. Again, I want to remind you, when we were coming up with the tree planting scheme before, it was based on a 4-story with a podium building, and in that process, that's part of how we came up with this. Look, we can't do everything for everyone, and that's where we came up with we would also add 70 trees that we would pay for, that the city would work with Caltrain and whoever, and the neighborhood group, to select and put the place locations. It's not something that we're going to do and say it's only going to be this tree. We're going to pay for them, and the city gets to dictate which trees where. That's the way the condition works. So we largely resolved that issue, and then it also got resolved by dropping the building down that extra story. If you remember, we have 3-story buildings here. We have a 12 to 16 foot berm, which is going to cover a floor and a half if you were up at that elevation. When you're across on the other side, now these buildings, instead of being 170 feet or 160 feet from the sidewalk over on the other side of Hawley, or even further away, they're another 15 feet or 18 feet away, and the buildings again are down. We've brought the height of these buildings down, not only what was requested, but another 5 feet. We've also moved them away 15 to 18 feet. At some level, I think we're beating a dead horse, because at the last presentation, you're hardly going to see these buildings. I mean, they will be there. They're not intended to be invisible. The conditions of approval didn't require them to be invisible. They are gorgeous buildings. They have lots of layering to them, and we've again brought this landscaping out. We think we've got a much better plan from that aesthetic standpoint, with trees that are on the scale of poplars. I mean, these poplars, when they grow much faster than even Paul says. I mean, we've got buildings that we've built with him with the sycamores, where they are 2002 vintage, so they're 12 years old, and you can't see the buildings anymore because they've grown so big. I mean, they grow big and fast here. They like it here. And and we've moved away from all these kinds of trees to those kinds of trees plus the poplars over there.
I just looking at your plan here, I see in a very short distance 4 trunks of 4 trees. Okay, this is your rendering here. If you look at the sort of the no, go back. It was the one that was right up there, right there. I mean, you see trees all the way down, in theory, all along the back there. Okay, the trees aren't there, but essentially where the trunks would be are. So. Yes. And the 3 sort of in the back there that I can see? Okay. All I'm saying, yeah, right there.
Those trees, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All I'm saying is that from the viewpoint of the residents that live on the east side, there are not enough trees.
Okay, so I mean, I think we've established.
I understand that.
I mean, I think we've established that. I'm not. I mean, I'm not. Sometimes I try and be funny. Sometimes I fail, and I'm doing neither now. You want more trees.
I want more trees.
The developer is saying they can't do any more trees. They've done the trees that they're going to do anymore. Either are not feasible or not going to look good. So, I mean, at this point, I mean, are there any questions you want to ask to determine what you're going to ask us to do or propose? Because, I mean, I don't think you're going to convince them that they want to put in more trees than they've got in their plans.
Could you put trees where there are parking spaces? If you lost parking spaces.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. There is a PD. We've designed a plan that fits with the PD. It has parking requirements. We've met those requirements, and for a combination of those reasons, and we're not interested in going back to revisiting the PD, number one. And number two, from a best viability of the project, it needs an appropriate level of parking, and we feel like that it is an appropriate level of parking. And we feel like, extend, you have your opinion, and hopefully the rest of you folks will have yours. We feel like we have a better, more benign design from the neighborhood than we had approved. We've made other accommodations that go beyond what the PD would allow for. And again, we have the condition that provides for the 70 trees that can be placed, wherever the city works out for them to be done. And if we think that we've got something that complies with it, I appreciate your comments. We just don't have any more viable places to put trees, and that's where we are.
And Building 6, the reason that there are no trees behind Building 6, is there like a design reason for that?
There never really were. I mean, there's utilities, there's a platforming. The other thing we have to remember, when we talk about Building 4, 5, and 6, when we talk about what's on the other side, that is the part where on the other side, Old County is the lowest because it dips down considerably, and it's got commercial buildings on the other side. It doesn't even have residences on the other side. Mm-hmm. So from basically the first time there are no residences south of Building 3. It's all commercial there. There's this thing of when we get down to Building 8, you come out from a residential neighborhood at Montgomery, but there's still commercial buildings on the frontage, and you walk there and you have what you have. In that location, we've doubled the amount of trees that we have. As Paul said, we've put bigger trees in there. But even so, we have a PD that was approved that had 3, but we've added to them in spite of that. We've made changes to make things better.
The PD also states that you'll put enough trees on the berm so that Building 8 will be obscured from the neighborhood. Okay. The problem with all of this is none of those trees may act that are on the berm. And in fact, if you can, do we still have that website? Okay. So go 3 more pages. Or 2 more pages. Nope. Yes, this one. So if you look at the top here, this parking lot here is exactly where building 8 is going to be. And these 2 yellow boxes are the trees that were planned to shield the neighborhood from the building. If you read down and you see the yellow lines on all those redwood trees, it says these trees all had trunks in the project area and would require removal. It's 10 feet away from the tracks. The same thing is true of the poplars that sit on the other side. All of those trees will be removed. I understand the PD was approved prior to this information, okay? Based on this information, we need to find a way to put more trees in there, okay? The PD says that essentially the trees will be planted there to shield it from the neighborhood.
Could the city take those 70 trees and move them down the berm 5 feet?
No, it's 70 trees north of Holly. These are additional trees.
And if, Mr. Chairman, if I could add some color and clarification to the issue of trees on the berm. As noted in your packet there, we've included a letter that was sent from Caltrain on October 30th to the Planning Commission. And what it says in there is that what we're looking at on the screen is a worst-case scenario in the environmental impact report, and that's typical for environmental impact reports to say, okay, we may have to tear out all the trees on the berm. But what this letter goes on to say is that Caltrain is committed to working with the city to determine a number of trees that the most trees that they can put, and also they will look at an alternative catenary design for the berm. So they'll actually look at different mechanical devices so that it would maximize the number of trees on the berm. So I think that what you're seeing in what's up on the screen there and in the EIR again is the worst case scenario. We anticipate that there will be trees on the berm, but we don't know how many. So we can anticipate that there will be an extra layer of trees along that berm. Again, we don't know how many, but we've been assured that they will work with us on putting as many as they can there. So I think that's something that you should take into consideration here. In addition, the intent of that neighborhood beautification program condition was to say that, okay, so let's say we get 30 or 40 trees on the berm, so the dollar value has to go back into the neighborhood. And the intent of that dollar value was to allow the neighborhood to decide where planting could occur in the neighborhood. And it could potentially occur in the sidewalk area where there aren't trees, or there are trees that aren't doing well. Trees that have not been provided as part of Eastside Connect. So that could go farther north than Eastside Connect, or in the yards of people that live there. So I think there's several layers of trees that will occur or can occur in addition to the development. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay. So, I think at this point, it's probably motion time. Unless, Jeff, did you have any more comments on the tile situation? Okay, so I think it's probably time for a motion of some kind.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep.
And that is, can we create a condition under which any of the trees that are removed from the berm are planted on the east side? So if they remove 40 trees from the berm, and they will need to replace them with trees, okay, that those trees are planted on the east side, and that we don't put those 40 trees in a park somewhere, that they're used on the east side again to find a way to help defray the impact of the views.
Mr. Marsters, I just want to make sure I understand the question. But the way what I think you're asking is if there are trees that are not feasible to put on the berm, that those extra trees would be planted on the east side.
I think that what he's suggesting is that if due to electrification, trees are removed from the berm, that every tree that's removed from the berm, a sister tree is planted on the east side.
Well, I think if you read some of the environmental documents in the letter, what Caltrain is proposing as a mitigation for the project, if trees were to be removed, they will replace them pursuant to the city's ordinance, which is a one-for-one replacement.
Yeah. It doesn't say where.
It's not precisely where, but our ordinance is designed to say the trees are going to be put generally in the location where the tree was removed.
I mean, and I think...
and you have to also tie it to a design issue. I mean, this is, after all, a design review, so that is something that ended up in the ordinance to have the tree planting and the fund, et cetera, that could extend out there. But I think that'd be possibly argued to be a change in that PD plan. So we really have to talk about how would those plantings act as a design feature, i.e. screening of the design of the buildings, getting rid of bulk and mass, because that's what our design review ordinance is about. So if you could come up with a condition that would talk about those types of things and tie the condition to the screening, I think it's definitely feasible to do. But in the abstract, we'd be relying on the conditions that we already have in the PD and our ordinance that requires one-to-one replacement of trees of a certain size.
So if you said something like existing trees that would screen the building masses of the proposed transit village, if those trees are removed, they would need to be replaced in such a way as to additionally screen the massing of the proposed buildings.
But if trees are removed off the berm, wouldn't it be the city's responsibility to replace it one for one and not the developer?
No, not the developer. Caltrain will need to replace them. What I am saying is that I want to make sure that those trees don't end up, in a park somewhere else in the city, that those trees, if they can't be put back on the berm or somewhere else adjacent to the berm, that they don't end up going somewhere else, that they end up going somewhere on the east side to screen the buildings.
Can we make a condition that the community can then decide? Is that something that's possible? That the community have input into
I think
that?
the problem staff is having is that we're talking about a different project.
Okay.
And so and the PD was designed to address that, and I remember dealing with that pretty extensively, both at the Planning Commission and at the City Council level. So, I think all we can do here today is make sure that any screening that you are imposing as part of this design review is consistent with or is supplemented by what is being done in the other project, but you can't really condition the other project.
Right. So, so Caltrans would have to replace those trees. It couldn't be
That's
tied.
right.
It couldn't be tied to Transit Village, right? Because that's something separate.
But they've agreed in their documentation to replace the trees 1-to-1. And there may be, and they've agreed to work with the city, so there is some flexibility there. It's just not a project that you have before you tonight.
Right.
We're talking about the Transit Village design, but it is a factor. I acknowledge that the screening of the trees is important, and the screening of the buildings is important. It's just that the trees you're talking about right now are not part of the project.
Because there is a condition in there that additional trees will be planted in the berm if necessary to screen Building 8 from the neighborhood.
Right, and we have some ability to influence that. It's just we don't have the. It's already in the PD, as I guess is my answer. It's already in the PD, and that's what the city council has decided. It's just now we're on design review, and we have to. If we're going to do design review, it's really this project, and we can't change the PD.
If I could make a suggestion, that is the condition. We don't yet know exactly what the tree removal will be for Building 8. Building 8 is most likely to be built not as part of the first phase, but a little later on. As soon as you can get to it. Right, so they can't start on buildings 5, 6, 7, and 8 until the transit center is built. So my point is simply that we'll have time to understand a little more. We could have a condition that says that at the time of building permit, that the screening planting for Building 8 will be reviewed in light of the electrification, so that if we could do something like that so that we come back and look at it, because we don't know if all those trees will be taken out. They've done a worst case scenario, and I do understand the concern. And
I would be willing to live with a condition that said the landscaping for Building 8 will be reviewed prior to occupation.
So it should be prior to issuance of building permit.
Prior to issuance of
so we can then look at any adjustments that need to be made for the tree removal related to electrification.
Because the EIR for electrification is supposed to be out within the next year. And I'm assuming that you won't.
That's the problem. It's a time issue. Does anybody in the room think the electrification project is going to occur before this project?
No, but the EIR may be completed.
We waited for 3-4 years for an EIR 5 or 6 years ago. That never occurred. I can't imagine that in the next. I mean, at this point right now, if we were to get our approval tonight or next week or whenever, we're starting construction drawings and we're going to be in for a building permit in 8 months. Well, we're going to be into the city before then. We're going to be in the city in a couple months, and there's going to be plan checks and and corrections that will be needed to take place to the plans. And does anybody here think that electrification EIR is going to be done by then?
Well, are you going to be doing the building permit drawings for Building 8, which you can't construct? Okay.
Yes. Well, because the EIR for electrification has nothing to do with the relocation of the parking.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we are of the belief from the landowners that they are moving forward with their plans for the parking lot as well.
Okay, but
So
there are other conditions of approval that say no building permit can be issued for 5, 6, and 7 until the transit village is done and relocated. The transit center, the new multimodal.
I understand that, but it has nothing to do with electrification.
We have some time. My point was simply is that starting construction next spring, it's not going to be on Building 8. And I was just suggesting a condition that says that prior to the issuance of the building permit for Building 8, that we take another look at the screening planting for that building.
But what you said earlier was, and you tied it to electrification, and if you do that, there will be no construction loan on this project until electrification occurs.
That wasn't how I heard it at all, and frankly, I mean, just
No, neither did I.
I think that she's trying to help you. She's trying to come up with a condition that will satisfy Commissioner Marsters and will be tolerable for you. And I think the worst case scenario for if you go faster, then nothing will have been done, and there'll be nothing to adjust. So I think you're fine.
Through the chair, just one other point on the timing issue. It just occurs to me that since we're only at the EIR stage, the redwood trees that are featured on your screen right now are not going to be removed anytime soon. And this project might even be built, and the redwood trees will be in place. And then when electrification occurs, the mitigations that are identified for electrification with the one-for-one replacement will be in effect through, and they're citing to our municipal code about tree replacement. So that's their mitigation. They're saying we're going to comply with the city's code.
As ugly as that electrification is, I think some trees being removed is going to be the least of people's worries. But thank you. So I'll entertain a motion. Reminding folks that, and this does not have to be included in the motion, but I would like to see a requirement for a tile roof, and we had previously discussed limiting garbage and deliveries between 10 p.m. and 6 p.m. I would actually 6 a.m. Thank you. I'd actually suggest 11 because sometimes folks do. After, like restaurants will do deliveries after they close. They often close at 10. But again, whatever motion you want to make is fine. Just my suggestion is you consider maybe a little bit more time. And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. I move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution approving the design review for the mixed-use project and the Transit Village plan development subject to the conditions and findings set in the resolutions, including the use of tile roofing and adopting no deliveries or trash removal between the hours 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Did you have another one?
And the review of the landscape plan.
And the review of the landscape plan for building at the time of building permit.
And just to note that this also includes the revised mitigation measure on noise that was included in the supplemental staff report that came in today, the one in response to Mr. Crabb's concern about sound walls.
And it includes the revised, what's the revised what? Mitigation, noise mitigation. Mm-hmm.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Does staff feel they have the motion? All right, I'm going to call for a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Bergman?
Yes.
Commissioner Marsters?
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen?
Yes.
Chair Silberman?
Yes. Okay, that concludes this matter. I have lost my agenda. I have found my agenda. Moving on to item 7, report on recent city council actions.
I don't have anything to report, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Planning Commission comments or reports? Anything from any members of the Planning Commission? I have nothing. I understand that there's been an appeal of a decision that we made with respect to dividing a piece of property, and then it might be scheduled for January. I don't know if there's anything to report on that, but I'm curious. If not today, maybe at the next meeting to get an update on that?
Sure. And you are correct about the date. That would be heard in January.
Okay, thank you. Any correspondence?
None other than was provided on the dais and that you received earlier via email.
Okay. And planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects?
Nothing other than the fact that we will have a planning commission hearing on November the 17th. One item which will be considered is an application for a variance at 2821 Majorca Way.
Is that also going to include the matter that was scheduled for, it was a review?
Housing element.
Housing element, thank you.
Yes, I'm currently in the process of confirming that with our consultant, so that could possibly be on the agenda as well, but I'll have to confirm on that within the next few days or so.
That's fine. I'm just curious. Okay. If there is nothing else, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.